Little Big Man seems to have been forgotten about. That's my impression. Could be wrong. I know you remember it, but nobody else seems to. And that's a shame because this is an interesting movie. It's sort of stuck in the 1970s, or in 1970 to be specific. But there's a couple pieces here that might be ahead of their time even today. Just from the title of the movie, you can tell that it's going to be a little bit different. It has some endearing quirks. It's far from perfect, but this is a surprisingly compelling movie. Little Big Man was directed by Arthur Penn. This was just after he had made Bonnie and Clyde and Alice's Restaurant, but just before he made Night Moves, which I have a video about. He was in his late 40s in 1970, but that's pretty young if you're a director, and he was part of a new generation that was remaking Hollywood, the beginning of modern American cinema, redoing some old ideas, in this case, redoing the Western. Little Big Man follows Dustin Hoffman as Jack Crabb from ages 10 to, get this, 121. The movie is narrated somewhat jarringly by the oldest version of Jack. He sort of croaks out his commentary throughout the film. Mr. Nobody, a cool, much newer movie with Jared Leto in it, basically plagiarizes this character in the style of narration, but that's okay, I guess. Little Big Man starts in the present day, but it goes all the way back to 1859 and then works its way forward to the Battle of Little Bighorn about 2 decades later. In this period, Jack Crabb spends a lot of time living with and fighting with the Cheyenne. Little Big Man is his Indian name, and this is in many ways a movie all about Native Americans. We'll talk a lot more about that in a moment, but Jack goes through some other phases as well, his other eras as he describes them. He's a gunslinger, the soda pop kid, a store owner, a Christian, a con man, a drunk, and on and on and on and on. This is an episodic movie, kind of a buddy comedy, but just with one person. I guess Jack has some buddies that come and go and then come back again. Just like last week, we have some historical irony here where Jack crosses paths with various historical figures, such as Wild Bill Hickok and perhaps most notably General Custer. The movie does start kind of slowly. I didn't realize that it was going to have so many episodes. Once you get into it a little bit more, it is a lot more dynamic, and you jump between these different plot lines pretty quickly. It's a fun movie to watch, honestly. 2 hours and 19 minutes flies by. The tone of Little Big Man is slightly bizarre, which is probably one of its selling points. Even the most basic premise of this movie, with Dustin Hoffman not in any particularly convincing disguise, and speaking more or less how he speaks in The Graduate, living amongst the Cheyenne, it's a bit confounding. This is ostensibly a comedy, but there aren't really jokes in the movie. It is funny, though. It is funny. Dustin Hoffman kind of carries the comedy just with his demeanor. He has this innocence or naivete that was kind of his calling card, this childishness. At least he was big on that for part of his career. There are a couple of scenes in Little Big Man that come almost straight out of The Graduate, but he turns things up a little bit here. It's a little more cartoony, I guess. It's hard to describe exactly the vibe of the movie, but I'll just say that I think the funniest moment is when Jack Crabb practices his marksmanship and kind of imitates a gunslinger. This movie strikes a balance between being totally deadpan and totally ridiculous. That's not very common and doesn't seem easy to pull off. Arthur Penn isn't much of a moralist, wasn't much of a moralist, at least not in the classical sense. Bonnie and Clyde, more than almost any other movie, pulled Hollywood away from the traditional contrivances of the classic era and the production code. Night Moves is maybe one of the most detached and listless movies you will ever see, almost to a fault. Here, too, we get some detachment. Jack Crabb does some things that a classic Hollywood protagonist would not do, like leaving his wife, becoming a drunk, becoming a con man. He kind of just floats around. On the other hand, this movie does have a moral agenda, mainly setting the record straight on Native Americans and General Custer. This movie portrays Custer as an egomaniac and, in the end, a lunatic, which he probably was. These days, most people maybe take that for granted. Maybe everybody thinks of Custer as a bad guy, but I don't think that was always the case. In 1970, Hollywood was not far removed from generations of Westerns that demonized and reduced Native Americans, a sort of cinematic genocide to follow the real one. Little Big Man is not a rigorous historical film, but it has its heart in the right place, and it even has actual Native Americans in the cast. Most of them are extras, and many of them are Canadian, I think, but that's okay. Chief Dan George has a major role in the movie and was even nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Of course, he only got the part after Marlon Brando and Laurence Olivier said no to it. I'm not going to comb through the historical details of the film, but I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, the movie does have a hint of the old white savior complex. In it, it's illegal for Hollywood to make a movie about Native Americans without a white protagonist. Jack tells the story of the Cheyenne here he has this sort of privileged frame of setting the record straight, recounting the story of the Cheyenne. And it's sort of his story, but it kind of isn't. Why not just replace his character with a Native American? Well, yeah, good question. There's negative stuff to say here, but I think it's overall not an egregious film. It's interesting that so many movies feel like they need to have some kind of bridge between the audience and Native American society. This movie has a fairly conspicuous frame, like I said, where Jack is recounting his life to an ethnographer. There's a tape recorder rolling in the background of that scene, almost mirroring the film itself. I guess for many people, Native Americans are defined by their interaction with the white world, as if that is their entire story, and a lot of films, even positive ones, can't escape that dynamic. Of course, this film itself is a tale of the Native American encounter with the white world. The film pulls out some cool details from Cheyenne life that are worth crediting, I think. For instance, we meet a contrary warrior who does everything backwards. This is pretty over the top, embellished, I think, but the basic idea is real. We meet a Himene as well, also known as a two-spirit. This is a third gender in Native American society. Again, pretty embellished, but this was a real thing. And today, if you're really with it, like I am not, you might have friends who identify as two-spirit, or you might know people. Some people maybe assume that queerness is this new thing, that traditional societies are straight, as if that's somehow closer to nature. But there's a ton of counter examples of this, and in nature too. Why are these interesting characters in the movie? Is it a celebration of Native society? Is it some kind of exoticism or historical tourism? Is it an allegory for 1970s social issues? Could be all of the above, I guess. One more thing about the Cheyenne is that the Indians of this movie have a somewhat mercurial undertone. They're portrayed as being a little bit mystical, which is interesting. I was reminded of a book I read in middle school called The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. The title of that book, like the title of this movie, is a little bit contradictory. There's some backspin on it. I think the similarities go deeper than the title, but it's been a while since I read that book. Anyway, it's a little hard to describe, but if you've seen Little Big Man, think about the ending. The chief's final act is sort of this heartfelt moment that then spins around into farce, and it's endearing, but the wires get a little bit crossed here. Is this Indian humor? Is it the film's satirical and comedic mandate taking over? A lot of the mysticism in the film could almost be read as satire. I think there are moments where we see Native beliefs front and center, where they're really centered and where they are given a fairly powerful stage. But there are also places where you wonder, are they just making fun of them a little bit here? Which, I mean, it is a comedy, but interesting balancing act they're doing here. Hard to know exactly what to make of it, hard to pull these things out. This movie sort of reads like a tall tale, but it also has some really serious points, and maybe it's a little hard to separate those things. But like I said, I think overall, it turns out fine. The movie has its heart in the right place. It feels a little fake at times. There's a moment early on where Jack punches an Indian, and the guy is totally astounded. Apparently, the Cheyenne had never heard of fist fighting. This doesn't seem legit. Maybe there's some piece of historical trivia, but it feels completely phony, and at the very least, the acting in this scene is terrible. Overall, though, the movie does center Native American culture in a way that very few movies had done or have done since. And look, it's way better than Soldier Blue, the other Native American film from 1970, which, of course, I have a video about. I wonder if Native American stories were more salient in the 1970s than they are now. It's an interesting question. I know that in some ways we would probably expect, oh, well, the newer movies are going to be more politically correct and more historically accurate and just more with it in general. But in some ways, I think this was I think the stories may have been more salient at the time, and there were a number of films from this period with this theme. I'm thinking about maybe watching Jeremiah Johnson. Let me know if you've seen that movie and if it's worth checking out. Anyway, to some extent, this film was a proxy for a war that the United States was in the middle of in 1970, but which way did the allegory really flow? Did people excavate old stories to make a point about what was happening in Vietnam, or did the current events open their eyes to the past? Again, could be both. It's a little bit hard to separate out some of the many facets of this movie. One way that the film feels right at home in 1970 is by being surprisingly raunchy. It almost has a burlesque undertone to it. Jack has his own quiet, awkward sexual liberation, and part of this is at the hands of Faye Dunaway. Her role here is kind of cartoonish, but she's really good. I think we might have a Faye Dunaway series coming soon on the channel. I've wanted to do one for a long time, but it took me a while to track down some of her more obscure films. Faye Dunaway often plays characters with desire, with a certain newish sexuality, I think. Desire that's just under the surface, at times contained, but mostly not, simmering, more than that. Her characters usually pay some price for following their desire. There's torment when it's contained and when it isn't. This sort of describes her in The Arrangement. I've got a video all about that. She often starts out maybe in a privileged place in society, but is then pulled away from it. Similar thing going on here. Anyway, I'm not sure I captured exactly, but Faye Dunaway was an actress for a time of sexual upheaval, and that is part of this movie, without a doubt, and she is really a light in this film. Let's talk a little bit about the style. This movie has a very basic score. It's music that could plausibly come from the time when the movie takes place. I don't think it does, but it's not too much of a stretch. For the most part, the score is probably too sparse, but it has its moments. There is some cool aerial photography in this movie. Some of it is your classic, really shaky helicopter shot, but some of it is pretty nice. The movie was filmed outside, some of it even near where the Battle of Little Bighorn really took place. Little Bighorn, I guess you'd call it. That's a river in Montana. A lot of the movie was filmed in Canada, I think, but we'll give them a pass. The movie is a little loose geographically. You often don't know exactly where or when Jack is, but that fits the film's folksy, tall tale kind of vibe. The last thing I want to mention is that this movie has a note of listlessness throughout it. I sort of touched on this already when talking about Arthur Penn, but it's worth coming back to it. So much of classic Hollywood is about graceful integration within institutions. That's the happy ending. The assemblage of the family unit is the king here, with just about every single classic Hollywood film. I get choked up just thinking about it. Just about every classic Hollywood film ending up with a family being formed in one way or another. Arthur Penn didn't do that. Look at Bonnie and Clyde. Look at Night Moves. These are movies where institutions are not very appealing and where families, if anything, are torn apart. If I had to pick a genre for Little Big Man, this odd and multifaceted movie, I wouldn't say that it's a Western. I wouldn't say it's a comedy. Wouldn't say it's a satire. I would call it a road movie where all these things of society, families, money, reputation, they come and go. In some ways, it's an easy come, easy go situation. Not too big of a deal, just drifting along. You know, we're flitting between all these different images from Westerns. We're unraveling the logic, deconstructing it a little bit. In other ways, you know, in some ways it's easy come, easy go, but in other ways, it's something deeper and something a bit tragic. And, you know, these Hollywood Westerns perhaps did have a cost, just as American Western colonial society did as well. Anyway, that's Little Big Man. Pretty cool movie. Odd, but fun, and actually surprisingly moving in the end.